Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am doing a response video to Gavin at Genre Books. He made a video called Your Best Shelf, a Top 10 List. And in this video, he creates a bookshelf that he does not actually own. These are books that he would like to own, but for whatever reason, he doesn't own them now. And he encouraged a lot of other booktubers, myself included, to make their own best bookshelf of books that you don't currently own, but would like. Now, there are a few rules to this list. The book that you want to put on your bookshelf actually has to exist. You have to be able to go out and buy it, or someone owns it somewhere. As Gavin said in his example, you can't put on Hemingway's first novel, Lost on That Suitcase, on a train somewhere in Europe. You cannot put on the Necronomicon, because the Necronomicon is a fictional book created by H.P. Lovecraft. The book has to exist somewhere in the world. You have to be actually physically able to read the book if you owned it. Therefore, I could not own an original Greek book. I could not own a book in French or so forth because I don't read those languages. Theoretically, I could get a book in Spanish because I just know an itty bitty teeny weeny bit about Spanish and can make out a little bit. So if I wanted to get a book in Spanish, I could, but it's not going to make my top 10 list. Third, money is not an object. If a book costs $1 million and you want it, you can afford it in this fantasy video because you have fantasy $1 million bucks to buy these books. Those are the essential rules. So what 10 books would I like to put on my fantasy shelf? This is Paperbacks from Hell. And I'm cheating like hell because I'm going to say every book in this book I want on my shelf. I actually own a bunch of them, but every one I want. At one point in time, cheap horror paperbacks were plentiful. You could go into a paperback store or used store and just grab them for like $1, $2, maybe $3 tops for these old horror books because nobody wanted them back then. But when Grady Hendrix came out with this book, Paperbacks from Hell, he made collecting horror paperbacks a thing. And now they are very expensive to find. If you go on the internet, the books that were once dirt cheap are now, a little bit pricey. Now, I guess I am cheating like hell by saying I want them all. So I'm going to narrow it down to one book that I used to own, Death Tour by David Michaels. I originally read this book in high school, and it's about alligators in New York City. Not a great book. I read it a day, even as a teenager. I eventually unhauled it. When I was an adult, probably in my 40s, when paperbacks like this were cheap, I bought a copy for $1.05. People may be familiar with this story because I've told it before. So I bought that paperback for $1.05. And then when I was living out in Washington State, my wife had a great idea of downsizing our suburban home into something much smaller, and I had to get rid of a lot of books for the new home. And I looked at this old paperback. It cost $1.05. I had no plans to read it right away. And I said, I'll unhaul it because if I ever wanted to rebuy it, it only cost $1.05. So I unhauled it. Then lo and behold, Paperbacks from Hell came out, and this paperback is now quite pricey. I looked it up just before I filmed this video, and you're lucky if you find a price less than $30. That's actually cheaper than the last time I looked. Last time I looked, it was over $50 for all copies. So I regret unhauling my copies. So the advice from me to you is don't unhaul your old paperbacks. Keep them. Maybe, like Death Tour, it will become semi-collectible. So I would like to find another copy of Death Tour. There are at least 2 paperback covers that I would like, but I am not going to spend $30 on this book. Even though my price is this fantasy shelf is unlimited, in the real world, it's going to have to cost less than $10. Second book on my shelf would be a Dashiell Hammett pulpy paperback. I have most of Dashiell Hammett's books in a rather mundane cover. I have some on audiobook. I have some on ebook. But it's the pulpy covers that I want. I don't necessarily want all the pulpy covers. I just want one pulpy cover of Dashiell Hammett. The Maltese Falcon has an option or 2. The same goes for Red Harvest. The Thin Man, you got some options. But my favorite options for Dashiell Hammett is probably not one of his better novels, but The Dane Curse. There are some really fantastic covers for this novel. Some of these covers may exist for some of his other books, but I would like to get at least one of these covers. I think my favorite is the one with the woman with a diaphanous dress. And of course, she's naked underneath this dress. Totally risque and inappropriate for today's society, but it's a cover I would definitely want. The Postman Always Rings Twice by James M. Cain, one of the great and early crime novels. I own the book in audio, and I own the book in the Library of America. But this cover, take a look. It is just a salacious cover. The woman with her semi-deformed husband and the nice rake in the background. That is a cover I would definitely want on my shelf. The Man with the Golden Arm by Nelson Algren. It won the National Book Award in 1950. It is about a World War II veteran returned to Chicago. He is addicted to morphine, and he wants to be a jazz drummer, and he has a crippled wife, maybe crippled wife, that he crippled himself. And it's all about his addiction. And it's just a fabulous look into this low life of Chicago. And just the cover of this book speaks of that you can see him as a morphine addict. And it is close to being one of my top 10 novels written in America during the 20th century, and it probably would make my top 10 list. But I only have the ebook and the audiobook. I want this salacious cover. The Bear by Marian Engel, supposedly the most notorious novel published in Canada. It is about a single woman on a remote Canadian island. She is in a house all by herself with a large library of a deceased owner that she's doing some research with. Him. She's cataloging this library. And she's all alone except for the deceased owner's pet bear. She's supposed to be leaving the bear alone because it's a bear. Someone will eventually come and take the bear away. But she starts up a sexual relationship with this bear. It is not really a sex novel. It is about a woman looking for her independence and looking for independence through her sexuality. So she starts up this relationship with a bear. And this cover is just so salacious and naughty. I would really love to have it on my shelf, even though I own a common paperback with a dull, dull, dull cover. Okay, I'm moving out of my cover phase of books that I want and now going into more collectible books. I have to say that I'm not really into collectible books. My relationship to books is changing over time. I actually prefer to read now on my Kindle or listen to an audiobook. Don't mistake me. I still like having physical books for some editions, but for common reading, I prefer the Kindle or the audio. But the next books are books that I have read and really enjoyed. And even though I may own the Kindle, the paperback, or the audio, these are collectible books that I would like to have on my shelf. The first is Dahlgren by Samuel R. Delany. This is a limited edition. It is signed by William Gibson and Samuel Delany. William Gibson wrote the foreword to the current edition. I can't find this for sale currently, but I do see some old pictures where it once was available for sale. I have no idea how much it would cost, but Dahlgren is one of my favorite science fiction novels. It is also a very literary novel that a lot of science fiction fans would not enjoy because it's just too literary. Dahlgren begins with the last half of a sentence and ends with the first half. In between, you will meet the kid. He is a young man with amnesia. He does not remember his name. That's why everyone calls him the kid. He has only one shoe. He never bothers to put anything else on his other foot. And he wanders into a city that is lost in time. It is mostly abandoned. There are a few refugees that come to the city, like the kid, because no one knows quite where this city is currently. There are 2 moons above this city. These moons, the second moon, named George, does not exist outside of this city. And then the kid picks up a notebook. The notebook has been fully written in, except for the margins. So the kid starts writing in those margins. At the end of the book, you will encounter this notebook. And it is a very unusual typography. So if you want to read this book, you really have to be familiar with the print edition before picking up either the Kindle edition or the audio book. But still, one of my favorite science fiction novels. And I would love to have this signed limited edition hardcover. Geek Love by Catherine Dunn. I would like to get a signed first edition. It is available for sale somewhere between $400 and $600. It is my favorite 20th century novel written by a woman. It is the story of a traveling carnival. The owners, the husband and wife, decide to populate their carnival with their own children and make sure that those children are all freaks so they can have a good job at their circus. They have Artie, the flipper boy, the firstborn. He will start a cult of amputations. There is Olympia, the albino dwarf. There are the Siamese twins who play piano and fall in love with their piano teacher. And then there is Chick. Chick is the pièce de résistance of their parents, the ultimate freak, even though he looks perfectly normal. And then you have a second storyline told about 20 years later of Olympia out to protect her daughter from a woman who likes to, well, I won't tell you about the woman and what she likes to do. Oh, I'll tell you this a little bit. She likes to mutilate women and make them hideous and strange and pay them lots of money to do it. Geek Love is just one of the freakiest books I have ever read. And maybe that's why I really like it. J.R. by William Gaddis. I want to get a signed first edition. It would run me about $700. It won the National Book Award, I think, in 1975. It is a satire on American financial institutions. It is 770 pages long. There are no chapter breaks. It is about 90% unattributed dialogue. It features a young boy, he's an 8th grader, who amasses a fake financial empire. It is utterly hilarious, and it is growing as one of my favorite books of all time. I am going to be rereading J.R. later in 2025, and if this reread goes the way I expect, I think I'll rank J.R. as my 3rd favorite American novel. It's not going to be a book for everyone, but I would love to have this signed first edition. A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole in the Folio Society edition. It would run me about $225. This is currently my favorite American novel because you get to meet Ignatius O'Reilly, the fattest, the rudest, most pompous man you might ever meet in a book, and he has to work his way through employment in New Orleans in the 60s, and he is just not suitable for any type of reasonable employment. He will eventually become a hot dog vendor, seller, and eat most of his inventory himself. But this book is one of the funniest books that ever been written, and the Folio Society edition would just be a nice touch on my shelf. The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, published by the Folio Society. When Faulkner originally conceived of this novel, he wanted the publishers to print the Benji section in multicolored inks, because Benji is a man who has no concept of time, and his internal monologue keeps switching from the past to the present, and even farther in the past. So Faulkner conceived of colored ink to help the reader determine what section of time Benji's monologue or internal monologue is going through. The printers or publishers decided way too difficult and way too expensive, and they came up with this really ridiculous scheme of 3 lines of italics to say when there was a time shift in Benji's mind. But the Folio Society went ahead and put colored ink into Benji's section. And I would love to see this edition as Faulkner sort of originally intended it. I think they used more colored inks than Faulkner thought of, but who cares? I want to read this one. I want to see that colored ink and experience Benji's time slips on the page the way Faulkner envisioned it. It would run me about $600. And that is my best shelf. My copies really aren't all that expensive. I could write a check and the check would clear, but I'm not sure I really want to spend $600 on a book, even though I would truly enjoy to see it on my shelf. Of course, it's only fantasy money and a fantasy shelf, so there you go. This is what I created. This is not really a tag video. If you want to create your own best shelf of fantasy-owned books, just go ahead and do it. I am going to nudge one other booktuber, and that is Bad is Rad, because we sort of commented on books that we would like to buy back and forth on Voxer, and dithering back and forth, yeah, I'd love to buy that book, but I don't want to spend the money. Well, Bad, you just create this fantasy shelf because you have fantasy money to spend. I'd like to see what you would create. If you don't want to do it, don't feel obligated. It's just, we've had this conversation before. Well, thank you for watching and keep on reading.